Hi everyone! Today I'm coming at you with a book review for The Combat Codes by Alexander Darwin. The Combat Codes is a science fiction novel that was released on June 13th by Orbit, and it was actually originally self-published, and Orbit had picked it up and is now republishing it. This is a debut novel from Alexander Darwin, and this is a book that I gave 5 stars. So let me start off with letting you know what the Combat Codes is about. In a world long ago ravaged by war, the nations have sworn an armistice never to use weapons of mass destruction again. Instead, they use highly skilled warriors known as Griever Knights to represent their nation's interests in brutal hand-to-hand combat. Murray Pearson was once a famed knight until he suffered a loss that wounded his homeland, but now he's on the hunt to discover the next champion. In ruthless underground combat rings, Seago is making a name for himself. Murray believes Seago has what it takes to thrive in the world's most prestigious combat academy, but first, Seago must prove himself in the vicious arenas of the underworld, and survival isn't guaranteed. So let's chat about this book, because this book took me by complete surprise. If you had told me that I would love an action-packed science fiction novel that focused heavily on martial arts style fight scenes, I would have been shocked. That is not something that would necessarily pique my interest right away, but when I was given the opportunity to review this book, I had heard other folks speak very positively of it and really enjoy it. So I definitely wanted to give it a chance. Now, this book does focus very heavily on fight scenes, action scenes, martial arts style fighting. And while that's something that I don't necessarily look for in my fantasy or my sci-fi books, it's something that I absolutely loved about this book. Now, it's important to note that Alexander Darwin is a martial arts instructor himself in his day-to-day. So the fact that he's taking a lot of that personal experience and writing the fight scenes from that perspective was fascinating. You could really tell that he knew exactly how to choreograph all of these different fight scenes and action scenes, and it was so much fun to read for that reason. So for me, even though I don't love action-packed fight scene after fight scene training montages in my fantasy or my sci-fi, it's something that really pleasantly surprised me about this book and ended up being something that I loved about this book. Something else to note, even though this is science fiction, I do believe it can also be enjoyed by fantasy fans, because this does read to me more like a sci fantasy in the same vein as something like A Red Rising by Pierce Brown or An Empire of Silence by Christopher Rocchio. We are very clearly in a sci-fi novel because there's a lot of focus on technology and advancements in technology and how that can aid these particular Griever Knights in this fighting. There's circles that utilize this light technology that influences certain feelings out of fighters and makes them influenced to fight in certain ways. So there's a lot of technology being explored in this book that definitely makes it feel firmly science fiction, but the way it's told, the way the story's executed, the narrative itself reads like a fantasy novel, and some of the technological advancements aren't heavily explained as to how that technology came about. So it felt very much like some of it could have been magic almost. So definitely go into this thinking it's more sci-fantasy. So if you like your science fiction to be hard science, you're not going to find that in the Combat Codes. And if you like your fantasy to have magic and whimsy, you're not going to necessarily find that, but it's a really good blend between exploring really cool technology but in a way that's accessible to non-science fiction fans. So now let's talk about my absolute favorite part of this book, which was the characters themselves, and my standout character is Seago. So Seago is the character that is very much growing up in these ruthless combat rings in this underground scene, and he gets recruited to this prestigious academy to become a Griever Knight. And Seago himself, he was such an amazing character, very, very loyal to his found family, very much a resilient character who, no matter how many times he gets knocked down, he's always gonna pop back up and be there for those who need him, and he very much lives by his codes. So I loved Seago. He actually gave me a lot of Kaladin vibes from the Stormlight Archive. If you love Kaladin in that story, you may find Seago very reminiscent of that character. There were a lot of qualities that I found overlapped between those two characters, and I think that's why I found myself loving Seago so much. So I was very much invested in Seago. There are a lot of side characters as well around Seago that I absolutely loved. I loved the found family aspect of this book. So I think if you're looking for that in a sci fantasy novel, a really great found family, you're absolutely going to find that in the Combat Codes. It was so good for that. And then we also have the other perspective of Murray, who was also great to follow, because Murray was that character who used to be the really famous, amazing fighter, and after a horrible loss has since had to kind of step away from being the fighter and is now a scout for scouting out new talent and find Seago. So I loved that kind of mentor-mentee trope that's explored in this book as well. There were so many things to love about the characters and the dynamics with each of them, and I loved it. I loved it so much, and Seago has my whole heart. In terms of pacing, this book really does capture you right away and does not let you go. I thought that this book was paced extremely well. I never found it had a dull moment. It had a couple moments where we were getting a little bit of backstories or flashbacks from Seago's perspective, which kind of shed light on how he became who he is today, that I really appreciated, especially since I just loved Seago as a character. And then I also really enjoyed the writing style. It was something that was very easy to follow. I was never confused. I never felt like anything wasn't well explained to me. There were a couple of times where the technology, some of it had really intriguing concepts, and it took me a while to figure out exactly how some of that technology worked, most notably with the circles and the light associated with each of these different fighting circles. Once you have a grasp on that, it is so fascinating and interesting. I loved that technology and how that was explored. And then there's also simulators, sims as they call them, that kind of technology is explored. And I always felt like things were explained just enough to me, where nothing was over-explained or dumbed down, but it also wasn't under-explained where I just didn't understand how something worked at all. So I always felt like the pacing and the writing and the amount of exposition we got was always appropriate and serving the story very well. So overall, I loved this book. I can't believe it's a debut, and I'm so excited to continue on with the series. I think the one thing I'll say is the ending itself. It does end in a very kind of abrupt way where you definitely are left needing to continue on with the series. I don't think that this book necessarily works as a standalone. There's still so much left to explore. We've only just scratched the surface with this academy and these characters, so there's still so much left to go. So I would say that if you're looking for something where you could potentially read the first book in a series as a standalone, the Combat Codes, I think it's going to need the full series to get that full picture. So I'm super excited to pick up the sequel. I'm so excited that I loved this book so much. It was such a pleasant surprise and not something I was expecting to love as much as I did. And I can't wait to continue to shout about this book from the rooftops because I think it deserves so much hype. So should you read this book? I think, one, if you don't mind a lot of heavy action in your books, a lot of training montages, that sort of thing. That is very much a big part of this book. So if that's something that you don't like or you're going to be bored by, this is probably not the book for you. But if you like tropes like the mentor-mentee, found family, if you like the school trope, we're at a training academy and you very much have that school feeling. Those are all the tropes that I think are most heavily featured in this book. So if any of those sound like something that is right up your alley, then I think this is definitely for you. I also think that even though this is considered science fiction by Orbit, this is something that is more sci fantasy. So again, if you're a fantasy fan, this is going to be a great read for you. If you're a science fiction fan, it depends on what you're looking for out of your science fiction, whether or not you'll enjoy this. If you're looking for hard science, if you're looking for clear explanations of how technology works and exploring themes of how technology affects society or those sorts of things, you're not going to find that in the combat codes. But if you like science fiction that just takes place in our world to explore, but really at the end of the day is more about the characters and the world itself, then I think that this could really be for you. You have to let me know what you think. I hope you enjoy it as much as I did. And thank you once again so much to the publisher for sending me this copy for review. If you all enjoyed this video, make sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe if you'd like to, and I will see you all in my next one. Bye.